back, everybody, to another episode of Themes and Themes. With this week, we thought, hey, we had so much fun in the 90s, let's go back there. And you came up with the most brilliant recommendation of them all.
Oh, yes, something that is very, very 90s, except in its name. We're talking about Se7en this week. Really a genius piece of work.
Yes, I had a lot of fun going back to this. I was so thankful for your recommendation. Oh, I forgot what a genius piece of movie this is. It's so well written, it's well crafted, the acting is on point. It's just you can go on, and we will. We will go on and on. I don't think we have a bad thing to say about this movie, honestly. I liked all of it. I liked it. Look, maybe if I had to, the slightest criticism, it does have an exceptionally long intro, which is something that we don't get in movies anymore, which I'm thankful for. And it does kind of fall in that realm of movies where, apart from the ending, nothing really matters. It's not like there are constant plot points all the way through. It's like this movie hinges on its conclusion. Would you agree?
It really does. The ending is half of this movie, but the rest of the boring parts is setting up that really, really good ending. I also don't enjoy everything in this movie. Not everything is perfect, but I don't believe everything has to be perfect to have a classic on your hand. Hey?
Oh yeah, I completely agree with that. I think we're a little bit spoiled with Christopher Nolan, but he is the exception that proves the rule. Because I find the more movies we're looking at, faults can be seen as quirks if the overall message, if you feel like there was passion put into this project, the faults end up being theories and speculation more than, this is what's wrong with this thing, and this is what's wrong with this thing.
And indeed it does. It keeps us busy. All those little nooks and crannies.
No, undoubtedly. Talking about nooks and crannies, did you leave a like on our little nook and cranny here on YouTube?
I always leave a like on our little nook and cranny.
Well, thank you very much for that. We'll just wait here until everybody else does it as well.
Yeah, go like and subscribe.
So what did you think the story was?
Okay, good. So the story isn't that complicated, and we've seen it redone a bunch of times since then. It's about two characters, Morgan Freeman playing Detective Somerset, and Brad Pitt playing Detective David Mills. And they are investigating what looks like just random murders at the start, but it is a string of serial killer murders themed to the 7 deadly sins. This is where we get our title, Se7en. So each of the murders punishes a sinner. Then by the end, we do get our mysterious serial killer. He isn't caught as much as he gives himself up. And he explains his point of view before pulling off, as we've mentioned, very iconic ending. One of the most iconic endings to a movie.
Very iconic. Do you think something, because this is also one of the most highly parodied endings. You've seen this everywhere. You've seen this joke made 1,000 times about the twist in this ending. I will say this though, as far as twist goes, this one does break a little bit the rules, because for a twist to be a complete twist, it has to be set up, reminded halfway through, and then pay off. And this twist is never actually set up. But I think that's part of the charm of this movie, and we'll get to that when we talk about the ending a little bit later. Because first thing you said, two detectives, Detective Somerset and Mills obviously being new to this unnamed city, which is very cool. And that's where I think most of this movie, the 90s of it all shines through here. The aesthetic of it all. How the city looks, how they look. The fact that you can smoke everywhere, everything is dirty. There's just people milling about.
We've talked about this in The Blade as well, is that there's this strange surrealistic vibe to New York in the 90s. And it lends itself really well to, you could almost say, supernatural vibes, like vampires, or in this case, heaven, hell, demons, good, evil, and that great moral drama that plays out in this movie.
It's interesting you say that, because it is very surrealistic, and although faith is a big part of this plot, no one's faith is ever in question. That's not something that the characters talk about either. They never discuss each other's faith or whether they believe or anything like that. Like, all of that is left at your feet, the viewer. Like, you to decide, for you to have that little internal monologue. Like, is what he's doing right? Is what he's doing wrong? But the characters themselves never discuss the morality of his actions. but all whilst living in this complete filth, you would think that they would. Like, they would turn around and look at this, which is very cool. Like, I think it still looks very cool. This isn't something you see anymore, because ever since Friends, like the 90s, are portrayed as this. It's where young people go to find love and be hip and happening. And, you know, you might run into will.i.am, and it's all rooftops and views, and it's where this is more like, no, it's on the street. These are normal people. This is how they live. So if you look at the first kill, for instance, that house that they go into, fucking disgusting, man. And you can feel that guy's sadness and his loneliness. He's given up, and you see it in his surroundings, and but it works. It works really well.
It really does. It's so good. You're describing the disgusting scenes. The only story I've ever seen as disgusting as this is Invader Zim. That's the only thing that is as gross as this. Every corner kind of feels like it's covered in grime and piss and, sin. Yes, all kinds of it. There's 2 specific spots where this changes. 3 specific spots where we see where Mills lives, where Somerset takes a refuge in the library, and then finally in the desert, away from the city and all its sin. You could almost say that the final segment is fully in view of God's throne. And we get that perspective as well by the end. But yes.
Yeah, you do, because most of it is shot from the top, so you see it as God essentially looking down on it. That's very interesting. I didn't notice that, but you're absolutely right. The more they drive out, the more golden the sun becomes, implying the further you get away, the better it is.
While in the city, it is a confusing, monolithic, rising mess. You're in these nooks and crannies, and you're in these...
And it's always grey.
It's always grey, and it's wet. It's raining. It's oppressive weather. So this is just this hopelessness. It is as if the city is hell itself. There's a lot of that going through the movie. The city is nameless. You probably knew this. This is a little fun fact. The city is nameless. This links it to our serial killer as well, who is given the name John Doe and nothing else. It links both of them. This could be anywhere, but it also makes it mythical, you could say. This is a mythical moral opera playing out. They make a lot of references to Dante and Catholic doctrine in general, how they think about sins and how people get punished in the afterlife for all their sins. So even within the world, the characters have to learn these rules. And while, for instance, Mills is learning these rules, we as the audience also start thinking about these rules of morality and everything. And this helps us to, I guess, pick a side by the end.
That's true. That's actually very true. Because, we'll get to it when we talk about John Doe and his plan. But it is very laden with the age-old cinematic question of, what they're doing is wrong, but is it for the right reasons? And does that still make it wrong? Yes, it does. Yes, it's still very wrong. We'll get to it in a second. But I completely agree with you. I didn't think about it like that, but the city and the part that it plays and the operatic themes overall. It's also interesting how they're confronted with religious symbolism, but they also just shun it off as just dogma in some cases. But the more they investigate this, the more obsessed they become. They start treating it with a little bit more respect. And they start, not Mills so much, because he is obviously the personification of youth.
And he pays for that. He pays for not learning.
I want to talk about that a little bit. Maybe we should just get to it.
Yes.
Let's talk about the characters for a little bit. So I feel that both the main characters, Somerset and Mills, are the only real characters here. The supporting cast are all used as references for very individual, very selective human emotions that we might feel. Example is like the police captain. For instance, he's very apathetic towards his job. He doesn't care about the people getting murdered. He just wants the cops to close cases. He just wants to look good. He wants to keep his job. He wants to provide for his family. He doesn't care about the integral part of what happened. That story Somerset tells him about the guy who was robbed and his attacker stabbed him in both his eyes. He just says, I heard about that. And then that's it. But he represents how complacent we can become. Where the younger cop, the guy in the SWAT team played by John C. McGinley, who later goes on to become one of my favorite characters of all time. He plays Dr. Cox in Scrubs. Love that guy.
Oh, amazing. I didn't realize that. It clicked now.
Yeah,
That's
that's him.
amazing.
He's still young, still bold, still has that face though. Very, very lockjaw. That guy. I absolutely love him. Anyway, he represents art because Sloth, one of the kills that John Doe does, Sloth is a child molester, and he whispers to that guy. Well, he thinks he's dead, but he whispers to him, "You deserve this," and that represents our sense of vengeance because we do. We have this discussion. We think about Thanos and whether he did was right or wrong. We do have this duality. Like, if something that bad happens to someone that does such bad things, is it still as bad? Which I think is cool. Where Se7en and Mills are very much fully fledged characters. They've each had a life before this. They will continue to have a life afterwards. And this is just, well, for both of them, I think very traumatic and obviously life changing in certain ways. But they're the only ones who have like real depth. And I think it works. I think it works well, especially considering what happens later when you have these two fully fledged characters who you've seen argue and bicker and have these contradictions, and then you introduce John Doe, who is not, he's not a character as much as I think he is a psychology chapter, and I'll talk about it when we talk about it in the ending. But I think that's because you get to see actual personalities, and then a psychological dilemma, and all of that plays out in the ending. Very good, yes, love this.
I must say,
love it too
if you
much.
put those three together, there is a strange little triangle that forms out because they all want justice. They all want the world to be good. They have the same motivations, the three of them, but how they think it should be done and how they feel about it. If you listen to Somerset talking about apathy and allowing yourself to not care. But if you care too much, you end up like John Doe, where everything spirals out. You're you're going on a killing spree, a high-profile killing spree
A very well thought out killing spree, but a killing spree
for
nonetheless.
caring too much. For not realizing that this battle is not yours alone. It takes many people. This would have been a buddy cop movie if it wasn't a tragedy, because it is very hard a tragedy.
It is undoubtedly a tragedy. But let's talk about John Doe a little bit and his motivation and his plan and such. Let's talk about the twist.
Yeah, major spoilers for a movie from the 90s.
Yes, for a movie that is, if you don't want to know how it ends, stop now. It is on Netflix. You can watch it there. Netflix will take the sponsorship. All right. So, do you want to do the honors? Do you want to talk about how this movie ends?
In the end, John Doe gives himself up, and he will testify to everything. He'll make it easy for them if they follow a few requirements by the end. He has this little demands. Just so you know, Kevin Spacey plays John Doe. They actually did a lot to keep that to themselves back in 1995, when you could keep things to yourself. But anyway, so he gives himself up. He'll make it easy if they do what he says. What he wants is to show them the last two murders. The ones we're missing is envy and wrath. He'll show the last two murders to only Detective David Mills and to Detective Somerset. Only they have to go with him to a location that he won't reveal, and there he'll show them the last two bodies. On the way there, they have a conversation. They have a conversation about what he's doing. David Mills is saying he's just a psychopath. He is a rap sheet for psychological.
Yeah, he pins him. He gets insulted at that as well. He goes, "No, I'm not."
Yes. And he thinks of himself, John Doe thinks of himself as a force of nature, and he might be. He might represent the darkness in each of us. Who knows? But he thinks of himself in that way as well. And then Somerset, who is by far the most grounded in the car at that time, still wants to debate. He doesn't write him off, and he doesn't take his side. He wants to explore this situation. But they go out into the desert. John Doe takes them out in that heat. We have a little chopper flying overhead, but there's power lines, big power lines in the way. It's all very important. So they can't get close. They're isolated. that drives a delivery van out into the desert. Detective Somerset goes and he stops the delivery van. He's like, get out of the car, The delivery guy says, I'm just delivering this box to this
The
location
guy
in the
paid me a lot of
desert.
money. But he paid a lot of money, and it's the 90s, and it's New York, and everyone's poor. What am I going to do?
If you had to Deus Ex Machina this part of it, I'm fine with it. What happens after is really divine. So he gets a box. Somerset reluctantly opens the box. I think it's a bomb first, but maybe not, whatever. Somerset makes a call. He opens the box. But he is removed from David Mills and John Doe, where John Doe is giving his villain monologue to David Mills. And he's describing his, you could say, afternoon with David Mills' wife, saying that he paid her a little visit and he was envious of David's normal life. But in the end, it didn't work out. He reveals himself as envy. This is his sin and he must die for it. And he reveals David Mills as wrath. He is justice. He is the divine wrath. Somerset comes over, tries to balance the situation, and John Doe comes out and he's like, oh, first we have a really iconic "What's in the box?" scene.
I've paid one of them all.
Yes. And then John Doe reveals that it is the head of David Mills' wife. Somerset is trying to talk David Mills down from a ledge, and David Mills is debating internally, and this is acted out so well.
He can cry like a boss.
So good.
He does it so well. That little internal, and he does it without words. It's just him going back and forth between being angry and being sad. What a scene.
Yes. And finally, he shoots John Doe. The helicopter is powerless to stop it, but they do witness it. Somerset also sinks in his shoes. Morgan Freeman.
No, he does very well in this. So I guess first things first, would you have shot that guy in the head if you cut your pregnant wife's head off?
Oh dear. I probably would have shot that guy.
No, unfucking doubtly would have shot that motherfucker. No, wouldn't even thought about it so hard. But yeah, so that's the twist. Here's the thing about that, with John Doe especially, is in the car ride going there, John Doe explains to Mills that if no one was around and you knew it would be consequenceless, if you had locked me in a room with you, he implies Mills would have beaten him to death. But Mills's wrath is more akin to what we would perceive an angel to be, because he is maybe a little hot-headed, but he's not malicious. So I think he represents angels, because angels are first and foremost soldiers. People forget that. They're all men and they're all soldiers, and that's what Mills represents. But he also represents like a youth, because he says a lot, but he has to say it constantly. Like, I've done other cases. I am an experienced detective. But everyone goes like, you're still a rookie, bro. You don't know what you're talking about. Just calm down, read this book. Just be calm. Right? But he's not sinful the way wrath is. Because you explained this one day to me, and I thought it was the most beautiful analogy for it. The 7 deadly sins are only sins in excess.
Yeah. So this is a theory I have where strengths and weaknesses are strangely related to each other. But the 7 deadly sins each represent natural drives we have. Gluttony is hunger. Lust is sex. It's reproduction, and just a major dopamine hit, unlike anything else on Earth.
Species surviving, ultimately.
If you go through it, pride is when you strive. It's important.
But it's also confidence, self-confidence, and assurance and respect.
Wrath is part of a system that gives you the adrenaline rush. It gives you power when you feel powerless.
The ability to stand up for what's right. Ultimately.
Yes. Or what you believe is right. This is the problem with wrath. Because wrath blinds you to everything except what must be done. And that is, it's a double-edged sword. But every one of these emotions or these ideas come from a good place, things that helped us survive through time. And this is from an evolutionary standpoint that I look at this. It's not from a creationist standpoint. So I go in conflict to this movie's Catholic vibe, actually.
That's very interesting, and I think you're absolutely right with that. But I use that as an example to explain John Doe, because even his name, which he chose for himself, is a term that's usually reserved for victims, murder victims that have yet been unidentified. And he plays the martyrdom card, but he sees himself as a victim, ultimately, which he is. Because remember, Mills, at the start of the movie, we learned that Mills has only been in that city for about a week or so. And John Doe acts like his plan has been this, because we know he's had that guy in the house for a year. So there's a very good chance there was another person that was the target for the wrath. But by them interrupting his plans, he execute because he's obsessed. Because if his true motivation was the betterment of society, then he would have thought about any avenue to do that and not just the singular one. Because he is, and as soon as you get this with like the Thanos archetype villains as well, like their motivations might sound morally debatable, but ultimately it's their obsession that makes them bad guys, because they can't see any other way except this one that they've chosen for themselves, which is what he does. And I think he feels outsmarted by Mills, who essentially thinks less of, because he thinks less of everyone, and then acts out of vengeance, out of spite. And then because of that duality, and for as mind as fragile as is, because his mind is fragile, I think he had to work in the little self-sacrifice envy bit just so it could make sense to him. Because if you dissect it, it doesn't really make sense. Why did Mills become the target of his obsession? Because he doesn't know Mills. He didn't know Mills when he started this thing. Because of the sloth guy, we know he's been planning for quite a while. And he has a very victim mentality as well. He creeps in the shadows and then judges everyone and doesn't look at himself, thinking he's already pure, which is why I think is such a great character.
If you think about the emotion of envy, it is what I deserve. How can they have it when I am so pure and I am the martyr and I am the
Yes. How can he have someone that loves him, that they're willing to have a child with him, when I'm this great and this smart and this pure, and I only do what's right and I only think of other people. But he only thinks of other people in a judgmental way. He doesn't think of other people's well-being. He only thinks of them in comparison to himself, which he has already decided is far better than everyone else. Which is what makes Mills the real good. Because Somerset as well, Somerset I think is a representation of what happens if you deeply care but get too weighed down. And then you also find out Somerset he's not this knight in shining armor. Like he coerced the girl into having an abortion, which is horrible if you think about it. If you think about the act of doing that, weighing someone down to the point of having an abortion, it's some would say psychotic in itself. It's definitely a bit sociopathic.
It is, but okay. So if you wanna get into it, and I really do want to get into it a little bit, he can't afford to be idealistic because he has sinned, and because he has like that little stain on his record, he can't claim like John Doe that he is divine justice because he is just a man. I think that is a really important contrast he has to David Mills and to John Doe, is that he can't claim he's pure. He's not delusional like John Doe, and he has a lot more in his life than David Mills. You know, he has experience and the weight of wisdom, and that's the thing about a wise character or wisdom in general, is that the more you fuck up, the wiser you get.
That's actually very true. I didn't think about it like that, but it's because he does take a debating stance. He doesn't. Mills is, oh, you're a freak, you're a psychopath, but he doesn't do that. He's very like, I'm not gonna upset this guy. I don't have a clean sheet as well. Where you can imagine Mills probably doesn't have it as well. He's just not as honest with himself as Somerset is.
Maybe he is. Yeah, maybe he's just as delusional as John Doe. They suffer from the same thing.
But what do you think happens to Mills afterwards? Because I'm convinced the cops cover that up. Like the police officer said, the police captain shows up and he tells Somerset, don't worry about him, we'll look after him. Do you think the cops cover that up? Like Mills won't go to jail, no? Like even if you had to argue that in court, I think a jury would go, no, bro. Like these are extenuating circumstances.
And he's catatonic. He's shown to be catatonic by the end.
Yeah, he might just stay in that state.
Yeah, he's entirely shut off. for all intents and purposes, he is dead. I think the reason he is kept alive beyond the rest of the sins is because he is not a bad person. He fights for good and justice, but he does suffer from a temper. He does suffer from wrath. So that's kind of how I argue that for myself, is that John Doe kind of gives him a stamp of approval by allowing him to live with this such a tragic ending, man.
It's hectically tragic, it is, but it's also very hopeful because Somerset comes around. Just one of the things before we get into final remarks, one of the things that I really liked, and I always like seeing this because I feel it's the greatest piece of cinema. It's just two guys sitting in a room talking, and the bar scene where they talk about the contradictory ideas, where Mills says, I cannot believe what you say. I cannot believe that we're either apathetic now or we're going to be apathetic. Like, some things have to matter. So he does still show that idealistic. And Somerset takes some of that. He goes, yeah, he's young, and yeah, he's youthful, and yeah, he still has a lot to learn, but he's not wrong in that blind conviction that there is hope, there is good, there are things worth fighting for.
Yeah, I love that scene. That's where Somerset describes he doesn't blame people for becoming apathetic, because what is the alternative? The alternative is John Doe. The alternative is being broken. Bringing justice, as it were, in whatever way you see fit, or shuffling along and living with the sin. It's a little bit of it's a hard situation to be in, and Somerset knows this. He knows that most cases don't get closed. There is too much chaos to actually reduce, and Mills, and that's the thing, he's still idealistic, so he is the good guy because he believes in the good things. He hasn't been worn down yet, though. He hasn't been tested, and then his first real test, he fails.
I see. Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. It breaks him,
Yeah.
That's very true. Anyway, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about the kill, so I just briefly want to, let's say it on the count of three, because we didn't discuss this beforehand. What was your, I don't want to say favorite kill, but what was the one that stood out the most for you? You can we'll do it by sin name on the count of three at the same time. Okay. 1, 2, 3, lust.
Pride. Is it lust? Lust fucks me up.
Which one was it for you? Sorry, you broke out a little
bit.
Pride is a hectic one. What is it about it that got you?
No, it's just the poetry of it. Not even killing her, just defacing her and saying you have a choice. Save yourself and live with the defaced, literally defaced, denosed. They make then make the line, cut off the nose to spite the face. Either do that or drink the pills, kill yourself, and
just that absolute confidence that you won't do it, that he just leaves. That's what they say as well. Like, he did this and he left. Just that absolute confidence that there's no way this girl is calling the cops. She's not living with this.
No, and that's the thing. He proves the sin with pride, and that's nice.
And it does also reaffirm him.
Yeah. You said lust, eh?
Lust. It's just two things about that thing that he builds. The actual act of it is just horrifying. It's just so horrifying if you think about it. But also that guy that they got to act the one who wore the suit, just his absolute shock at what happened to him just now. Just it's such a performance, and it's only that scene is like a minute long, I think, and he brings over that absolute shock and horror of what he just experienced just so well. It's just horrifying, man. That thing that James Suit with the knife, just absolutely.
As I said,
it gives me the shivers, man. For real,
it fucks me up.
But finally, what did you think? Would you recommend this? Absolutely, right?
If you have the stomach for these kind of things, and I rarely do. I don't like horror, so you can take this one to the bank. It is 7 out of 7, a Sinful delight.
No, I completely agree with you. It's definitely. Here's a fun little fact about the movie to end on. The year it came out, 1995. It was also the 7th highest grossing movie for the year, which is just I love little tidbits like that. You can't make this shit up.
That's some crazy divine planning, eh? Wow!
You said it, man. Well, anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. Please leave us a comment down below if there's anything specific you would like us to go through. Just leave us. We love checking out the comments. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next week.